Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What is going on? Matt O'Leary with Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you today, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. I mean, we're in the month of training camp. We're getting very close, only a few weeks away. I'm hoping to try and get up there to New York for a practice or two, go see my New York Giants in person and see some of maybe the viewers of Big Apple Blitz at training camp. That would be a lot of fun. But instead of doing the training camp Hard Knocks this year, they're doing the Giants behind the scenes front office Hard Knocks. And we got that first episode. It was really interesting. There was a lot to unpack from it. And there's been a good bit of news for both the Jets and the Giants recently. So plenty to unpack.
Absolutely a lot to get into today. And I think that's a good place to begin the Giants in their first Hard Knocks episode. So as a Giants fan, highly anticipated for you when we last discussed on Tuesday's episode. What was your some of your biggest takeaways from episode 1, and what'd you think?
First of all, I thought it was a great show. I thought it was really fun. And I think that I prefer this behind-the-scenes look in the front office and the behind-the-scenes look during training camp. I think this should be something that they do regularly going forward. But some of my top takeaways, I think we all had a takeaway, which was Daniel Jones is probably playing for his job this season. Like, it very much felt like the whole conversation, everything that Joe Schoen was doing was tied into the conversation of Daniel Jones has to prove it this year. They had conversations about his health and his health history and injury history and how that's going to play into everything. And I found the whole discussion on Jones to be the most interesting part of the episode. And there was one quote that Joe Schoen said that definitely got under the skin of many Giants fans, myself included, saying that Patrick Mahomes can't win behind that offensive line. Man, I've heard way too many Giants fans say that on social media. I do not agree with it. I don't think it's true. And I am a little bit irked that our general manager has that same mentality. And I don't think that that's the right mentality to have. But at the same time, he had the mentality of they're not going to pay Saquon Barkley because they're paying Daniel Jones $40 million to throw the ball. So they don't want to pay $12 million to a running back. And I thought that was good mentality. So saw a little bit of a double-edged sword there with Joe Schoen and his kind of thought process on Daniel Jones this season.
Yeah, I agree with you. Those to me were the two biggest storylines that I took out of this first episode. And I agree. Like, I think it's cool to get a behind the scenes look of a front office and their philosophy and the conversations that they're having on Daniel Jones. When I saw that, I thought, oh boy, the Daniel Jones hive is going to clip that one. And that's going to be making the rounds on social. And it was. And for Saquon, I think Joe Schoen got some heat for his comments because then they would go back and quote the cap hit for Singletary versus Saquon Barkley for this year. And against the cap, they're both similar in that same range for this season. And maybe it's just kind of the structure that Howie Roseman used for Saquon's deal. But I don't know. I thought he was getting a little bit too much pushback on the decision not to bring back Saquon Barkley. But I did find it interesting, the conversation that he was having with John Mara about Saquon and why they were kind of going the direction that they were.
Yeah, and on that point, I thought that the conversation with John Mara was really interesting because John Mara very much stated to him, I want to bring Saquon Barkley back. I want you to try your best to make that happen. Like, whatever you can do. I'd like to see Saquon Barkley back on the team. And Joe Schoen didn't really seem interested. Didn't seem like he had any interest in bringing back Saquon Barkley. So I thought that was important because it highlighted to Giants fans, because I've had way too many fights and arguments with Giants fans about how John Mara is secretly shadow running this team and not letting the general managers do their jobs. I've been arguing for a long time that's not true. Any Giants fan who thinks that is a conspiracy theorist and needs to relax. John Mara does not run the show, and I think that was the first time that we saw behind-the-scenes footage where the general manager truly is the one making the football decisions, running the team. The Saquon Barkley situation, I've made this argument before. If John Mara was running this team, Saquon would still be here. Odell Beckham Jr. would probably still be here. I think that there were definitely other opportunities as well where teams or players were cut or traded or whatever. And John Mara would not have liked to see that happen, but it happens. And I thought that was really important for it to be shown in Hard Knocks that Joe Schoen is the one running the football operations.
We got a few comments in here. First State Jets is hanging out with us. He says, whatever you can do, except pay him more than the owner wants to value. That's that is a big part of it. I feel like for just teams in general, like owners can say, oh, I want this guy or I want to keep that guy, but the money's got to come out of their pocket. So if they're, setting a budget for their GM, it makes their job a little bit tougher. I don't know if that was the case for this instance in particular, but just in general, a lot of times we see that where the owner only wants to spend X amount of dollars, and then that stops you from potentially adding someone you might want to keep.
Yeah, and that happens for sure. But I do think that John Mara has been really good with his general managers in the past, pretty much letting them pay and even overpay whoever they want. I think that the Daniel Jones contract is the best example of overpaying in order to keep a guy in the locker room. And John Mara really does not spare any expense when it comes to signing players, re-signing players, and everything like that. But it was really interesting to me that they were okay with letting Saquon Barkley walk. But meanwhile, we're looking at guys like Tony Pollard and even having discussions about what will Josh Jacobs make on the market and seemingly targeting some of those top running backs. And what I remember when we got into free agency, we thought that running back would be a signing for the Giants potentially early on, but in the Hard Knocks episode, it said that they might wait until the second week to target a running back, but then they just went ahead and signed Devin Singletary, I think, on the first day anyway. So I thought all of that was just really interesting. The back and forth that they had, Joe Schoen kind of being adamant that he doesn't want to spend big money on a back, spends kind of big money on Devin Singletary and does it immediately rather than waiting like he said he would. So I thought that whole running back and quarterback conversation was just very intriguing.
Yeah, I thought so too. OG Jets fan says, Matt O'Leary, keep up the great work. Thank you, OG. Welcome to the channel over here on Big Apple Blitz, talking all things Jets and Giants twice a week here. It's a lot of fun. So appreciate you joining us over on this channel. Can we get back to the Daniel Jones comments for a second? Because I wanted to get your opinion on if Joe Schoen's comments scare you at all about where he or if he's leaning a certain way about Daniel Jones entering his sixth season in the NFL, the making the comparison to Patrick Mahomes and he wouldn't be able to play behind this offensive line. Like, I get it. The playing quarterback behind a bad offensive line does make things significantly harder, but that is such, in my opinion, at least, such a cop-out answer when you get that from whether it's from teams or fans, because I think, there are examples of elite level quarterbacks who aren't in the most perfect situations still playing at a high level. But if, someone plays poorly, they get every excuse in the book to prove why it's not their fault. And, it happened with Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson for the Jets, and it feels like it's happening for the Giants with Daniel Jones for now a sixth year.
Well, I'm still banking on the year 6 leap. I think that it's still in the cards for Daniel Jones, but no, realistically, yeah, that quote did kind of frustrate me because I don't agree with it. Like literally the day prior to that Hard Knocks episode airing, I saw a 2-minute compilation video of Geno Smith breaking through tackles and sacks and throwing touchdown passes last season. And I think on paper, when you really break it down, the Seahawks had arguably an even worse offensive line in terms of talent across the board than the Giants did this season. They had just as many injuries, if not more, all across that line. And they didn't have former first-round draft picks or former third-round draft picks starting all over the place. They had a bunch of undrafted guys playing, practice squad guys starting for them throughout those games. And Geno Smith made do. Like, yeah, he got banged up a little bit, and he wasn't necessarily an elite quarterback or anything, but he was still a good player. And he was breaking sacks and navigating pressure and throwing touchdown passes. So I don't think it's a good excuse to say that the situation has been so bad in front of Daniel Jones and that's why he's failing. I think you do have to hold him accountable as well and take a look at the way that he played, because he didn't just always play so great in all of these games, but everybody around him was playing poorly. He was playing really poorly in a lot of those games too. Week 1 versus Dallas being an obvious one. Yeah, he got beat up a lot and there was a lot of pressure, but some of those throws that he made, I mean, they were ridiculous. He was running out of bounds on one of them, just threw it back into the middle of the field and threw a pick. You can't do that. So that you can't blame on the offensive line. And while that quote does give me cause for concern here with Joe Shane, also the quote where he said, "I'm not giving up on Daniel," that also gives me cause for concern. But then I also get a little bit more confident because he did say things like, "We have to be realistic about the injury history. He's had 3 injuries in 4 years. It's a big deal, and it's something that we have to consider going forward." And then there was another front office personnel member who kind of said something along the lines of, "We need to figure out if he's the guy or not this year." So I do think that they're having conversations about whether or not they want to continue with Daniel Jones. And hopefully in this next episode, I think they're doing the draft stuff. So maybe in tomorrow night's episode, we'll get some clairvoyance on who they interviewed with and how seriously they were considering drafting a quarterback as well.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see. And I think you bring up a good point too, like of the other side of the coin, where yes, they, in a way, were kind of backing their guy in Daniel Jones, but they left the door open for an out. And I mean, that was kind of obvious with the structure of the Daniel Jones contract too. Like we kind of always knew that they had this opportunity to bail out if things didn't go great. Unfortunately, things went really rough in year one, and probably in a perfect world would have liked to get out of it. But after the 2024 season is kind of your next chance where you could bounce out of the Daniel Jones contract. And who knows? Maybe, like you said, in episode 2, we'll get a look, and maybe they were high on one of these quarterbacks. But unfortunately, they just never made it to within reach.
Yeah, and obviously we heard the rumors, the trade rumors. Giants reportedly tried to move up on draft day, get Drake May. I wonder if we get any insight into that. If we get either the Giants altering the footage and trying to tell the world that that wasn't true and it never happened, or maybe they will show it and they will have some behind the scenes looks at the Giants considering drafting a quarterback. I think that would be really interesting. Obviously, it'll put Daniel Jones into a tricky situation with something like that going public. But if that's what motivates him to play better and take the year 6 leap, then screw it. Show the footage and show us the Giants trying to get a quarterback. I think that that could actually be a good thing for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, it could. Maybe a little chip on year 6 chip on his shoulder leap. That's what we were missing this whole time.
That's exactly it.
I love it. So good stuff. We were excited for episode 1. Very excited to see episode 2 tomorrow night. Let's get into our first Jets topic of the day. So Sports Illustrated put out a list of underrated players on each team. And for the New York Jets, they end up coming across Tyler Conklin as the New York Jets' most underrated player. And, you know, I think it's something that I've said on this show and on my own channel. I think the production that we've seen from Tyler Conklin in his first 2 years with the Jets has been good, especially when you consider the quarterback play that he's dealt with. He had 621 receiving yards last year, no touchdowns, but the Jets as a team, I think it's 11 or 12 touchdown passes they had as a unit last year, which is just insane in 2023. But even in his first year, 552 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he was splitting time a little bit more with CJ Uzama in year 1. But over the last 3 years, 593, 552, 621 in receiving yards. I think he's average to a slightly, maybe even slightly above average tight end, but gets treated like, I think, an afterthought by some Jet fans and by some NFL pundits when looking at this Jets, receiving core.
I think you're right. Honestly, maybe we've treated him as somewhat of an afterthought through some of our discussions as well. At least I think I have. I mean, we've talked about Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, we've talked about Malachi Corley a lot, but I don't know if we've had a lot of conversation about Tyler Conklin on the show. And I think that this is a good opportunity to kind of give him the spotlight and highlight how great of a player he is and how he could be an absolute weapon within this New York Jets receiving core. So it's always interesting because when we talk receiving cores, everybody talks wide receivers, but they forget that the tight ends are pretty much an extension of the receiving core. And to have a really good tight end is obviously a big deal, especially with Aaron Rodgers. I feel like throughout his career, he's never really had necessarily that superstar tight end to play alongside, but he always finds a way to maximize the value of every tight end that he has in the lineup with him. And I think that's really important for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, we're just a few years away from a 2020 season that saw Robert Tonyan have 586 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns with Aaron Rodgers. Now, I don't know if we're going to get double-digit touchdowns from Tyler Conklin, but I wouldn't be surprised. This is someone who has, I believe, 7 career receiving touch. He might come close to his career receiving touchdowns in just just this year. I think in the red zone specifically, that's an area where Rodgers likes to target the tight end. And the Jets just had one of the worst red zone offenses in the league last year. And that's how, a tight end who has over 600 receiving yards ends up with, 0 receiving touchdowns. That's still wild to me. But I mean, again, with a healthy quarterback and one who can move the ball, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Conklin creeping up closer to a top 10 tight end in the league, just in general. I think it was something like 12th in receptions and 14th in receiving yards, or maybe flip-flop that. But I think already he's a top half of the league tight end. And then, again, when you add in improved quarterback play on top of that, I think that's only a recipe for success for him.
I agree with you. I think that he's definitely in the top half, and he's a really good player and super productive considering how bad the quarterback situation has been for the Jets. But I do, in a way, want to play devil's advocate and say that maybe with all of those mouths to feed and with Aaron Rodgers coming back, Aaron Rodgers might maximize the value of other guys. And there is an opportunity here for Tyler Conklin to kind of become a forgotten man, not just with fans, but it is possible that the way that the offense is going to run this year, he might not get all that production, and it could have been production based on how bad the quarterback play was, force feeding the tight end, because bad quarterbacks usually have an easier time throwing short to the middle to tight ends rather than spreading the ball out to some of the wide receivers on the outside. So I guess I'd kind of ask you, why do you think maybe Tyler Conklin will thrive? Maybe why his production wasn't a result of having bad quarterback play rather than the opposite.
Yeah, so he was third on the team in targets last year. I think Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall were the two guys in front of him. And then it was Conklin third, and then a huge drop-off. Lazard was fourth after that with 49 targets. But for me, I think we see a very similar pecking order at the top. Garrett Wilson's going to be a target hog. I also think Breece Hall getting some dump offs is going to be up there as well in the receiving game. I guess part of it, I think, is I'm unsure about Mike Williams' health going into this year. I think if he's fully healthy and like out of the gate looks like Mike Williams of old, then yeah, I probably would bump him as someone who would get more targets than Conklin this year. But then after that, I think Corley and Gibson are going to kind of split time in the slot. Maybe they lean Gibson a little bit more early on, and then Corley kind of comes on in the second half of the year, just because in years gone by with this regime, we've seen them take rookies, take their time with these rookies, especially at the receiving position. So I still think Conklin ends up probably top 3 in my opinion, at worst 4th in targets. And if that's the case, I think we could be looking at maybe he doesn't hit 620 yards again this year like he did last year, but maybe he's in that like the 5 to 600 range with more like 5 to 7 receiving touchdowns instead of 0, and then is kind of just looked at with a little bit more, again, respect, I guess, because he's getting in the end zone finally.
Yeah, putting up touchdowns will obviously be a big difference maker. I think that from the Giants' perspective, I remember when Kenny Golladay was signed because he led the league in receiving touchdowns a couple of seasons prior. Not necessarily had the craziest amount of yards, but putting touchdowns on the board obviously is the biggest difference maker in the sport. And so once you're doing that, you'll get the recognition that you deserve. And I think that'll happen for Tyler Conklin. One other thing that I found on Conklin that I thought was really interesting, this says, according to ESPN, he had 246 yards after the catch last season, which ranked number 17 in the NFL at his position. So I guess kind of middle of the road, but he had a quote recently speaking with the media saying one of the biggest points of emphasis for him this offseason has been working on yards after the catch. How do I turn a 5-yard catch into a 12-yard catch or a 15-yard catch is what he said. So maybe we'll see him get a little bit more active with the ball in his hands and start creating more yardage that way.
Yeah, I think he has the potential to be good yards after the catch. Like there are a few moments last year, but he didn't really do it with much consistency. And I guess I kind of also give him the benefit of the doubt because really outside of Breece and Garrett Wilson, wasn't really, and actually at points, Breece Hall wasn't consistent in the middle of the year. I think, he had some struggles with the offensive line play, but overall the Jets offense wasn't consistent at all last year, except for maybe consistently bad. So I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt a little bit, and who knows, maybe that's just, by Jets bias peeking through, but I didn't, me personally, like I know through the draft process with the whole Brock Bowers debates, I'd have been fine if they took him, but I was comfortable and still am comfortable with the Jets tight end room. So I don't think I look at it as, as big of a need as what maybe some other people think.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And maybe it's the Brock Bowers conversation prior to the draft that has kind of changed the narrative on Conklin. Jets fans being so excited about potentially getting Bowers and NFL media personalities all pegging Bowers to New York. Maybe that is why some of the media has gotten down on Conklin. Maybe they just haven't paid as much attention to him because of all that, and it's changed the narrative, so to speak. So that could be interesting, but really solid player, and I do expect him to have a very productive 2024 season, like you said.
Harry chimes in, says, "Hey, Matt, looks like you're in your old studio." Yes. So I was doing some work this week on the new house. So I did a video from my phone from the new studio, but I can confirm desk and TV stand is up in the new studio. So it's a slow but sure process. Hoping in a couple weeks we'll be in there full time. But yeah, excited to get in there and get it rocking and rolling from the new place very soon.
That'll be really fun.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Let's get into another Giants topic. We're talking underrated, but apparently there is an overrated Giant, at least according to PFN. Brian Burns, most overrated New York Giant. Agree or disagree?
Honestly, I'm a little 50-50. If I had to pick one player who's the most overrated on the Giants, I don't know if I would pick Brian Burns, but I guess I could see the argument. I think that Brian Burns has been a really tremendous player throughout his career. But if you recall, prior to the trade happening, when we heard rumors about how it might happen, I kind of mentioned giving up all those picks, you're not going to be able to get your quarterback as a result of trading away those draft picks to get Brian Burns. And once you do, what are you really getting? He hasn't had that many pressures in the most recent seasons. And I don't know. I guess I generally speaking, I do have some cause for concern here. The Giants brought in Brian Burns, and it was their big offseason blockbuster acquisition, and Giants fans are super excited about it, rightfully so. He should combine with Dexter Lawrence and Kayvon Thibodeau and create a really nice defensive line. However, how productive has he been over the last few years? How productive has Kayvon Thibodeau been the last couple of years? I do think that there is a potentially disappointing end result here for the Giants if these players don't actually meet the potential, because the expectations are so high right now for this defensive line because they brought in Brian Burns. So when the hype gets that high, the excitement, the expectations get raised so high, can he reach those expectations, or is he ultimately going to look like an overrated player in this defense this season? That is going to be, I think, one of the more intriguing storylines for the Giants this year.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it. I mean, when I first saw this, I go, I don't know if I agree with Brian Burns being overrated, because I think he's good. But then, like, thinking about it a little longer, like, I don't know if I have another guy in mind who I would pick. Like, it doesn't seem like there's an obvious choice for the Giants of who their most overrated guy would be. Like, I'm sure some people would probably say Kayvon Thibodeau, even though we kind of went to his defense in a recent episode as well.
We did. And I think that he's probably the right answer, though, because there are Giants fans that think he is already established himself as an elite player. And I think that while he had on paper, like we said, a really good second season and definitely did take developmental steps forward, there are some that think that he took huge steps forward and is this really elite player. And I don't think that I can go that far. So maybe he could be the overrated pick, but I think that argument for Thibodeau, where some think he's really elite and others think he's just really good, that's also the same argument that you get for Brian Burns. Some fans really think that he is going to change this team for the good and absolutely give us one of the best defenses in the NFL. And while I think he's a great player, I don't know if he's going to make us have the best defense in the NFL or a top 5 unit. So I think that there are, again, just high expectations being set for Brian Burns, and maybe looking at his career and what he's done production wise and quarterback pressures, quarterback hits and everything. Like we've said, he's been really good, but has he been elite is kind of the bigger question.
Yeah, I don't know if I would put him in that elite tier. And maybe that's where the difference is. Like, if you have some putting him in the elite tier, then I could maybe get behind him being overrated. But I still think he's a good player. And it's hard for me to put good players in that overrated classification. But then again, it kind of gets into the semantic games. Like, is this a good player that people are viewing as great? And that's where the overrated comes in. And if that's the case, And then maybe Brian Burns is the most overrated guy. I don't know. Can you say Daniel Jones, but maybe not from the national perspective, but like the Giants overrating him?
I think Daniel Jones is the most overrated player in New York Giants history. So
Okay.
yes, I
Okay, so
think that's
maybe
probably
we
the
found our
argument. I
guy.
mean, yeah, him getting all that money, him being considered by so many Giants fans to be a player who has the potential to reach Eli Manning quality, and the fact that there are Giants fans who really still think that he can be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL as long as he gets this receiver, that offensive lineman, that tight end, that running back, all these different bells and whistles around him. Giants fans really think he could be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL and think that he's played as a top 5 quarterback in the NFL at times in his career. So, yeah, I guess amongst Giants fans, he's probably the most overrated player. But nationally, I don't think that anybody rates Daniel Jones very highly. I think that pretty much everybody is on the same page, thinks that he's not good, thinks that he should get cut next year. But generally speaking, Giants fans, it's a mixed bag. Some of them are like me, don't believe in the year 6 leap. Others believe that he's already had the year 2 leap and that he's been a great player for 4 years now. So, yeah, I think that within our fan base, Daniel Jones is easily the most overrated player. And then I think outside of our fan base, I guess you could probably make the argument for Brian Burns.
Interesting, but still, I think the Burns and to spin it back to a positive side here, I think Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau are going to be a nice duo this year, especially in a new system that we've talked a lot about, the improvement at defensive coordinator for the Giants.
Yeah, and I think that the defensive coordinator coming in, Shane Bowen, and the defense that he wants to run, conservative, just let the pass rushers do the pass rushing, not a lot of blitzing. I think that's going to play in really well to the style of Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau, allowing them to just be straight pass rushers and get after the quarterback every down, not setting up blitzers behind them and doing all these stunts and twists to get other guys free. I think that it's going to allow them to be really productive this season, but this is pretty much going to be the year where it's like, your talent versus the other team's talent. Like, we are not doing all the fancy blitzes and trying to get creative to generate the pressure. We just need to have the talented players on the defensive line. They have to earn the pressure themselves. So we'll get the right idea now. Like, we'll get full clairvoyance on, is Brian Burns an elite pass rusher? Is Dexter Lawrence going to continue to be elite in this defensive system because it's a little bit different? And is Kayvon Thibodeau still possessing that elite potential? We'll get the answers to that this season 100% because of the way that this defense is changing.
Absolutely. I agree with you there as well. Wanted to pull up last topic of the day here. ESPN every year talks to executives, scouts, and coaches and has them rank the top 10 at each position. And today we found out the rankings at running back, and Breece Hall came in at number 2. And I was a little surprised by this, not because I don't think he's deserving of being ranked that high, but I thought that some would hold his statistics from last year against him. He was just under 1,000 yards, had 500 and change receiving yards, but I was surprised to see them take into like the context of the Jets offensive line, the play calling, the quarterback play, all of it, and have him as number 2 behind Christian McCaffrey. I could pull up the whole list here too, so we could take a look at it, and wanted to get your thoughts on if you thought it was a fair ranking for Breece Hall coming in at number 2.
I think it's fair. I mean, in terms of potential and already the production that he's started to kind of put out onto the field, he's still a young player and still got room to grow. There are a lot of elite backs in this league, though, and so maybe 2 is a little bit high. But I'll tell you one thing now that you just pulled it up: 4 is definitely too high for Saquon Barkley. He is not a top 5 running back in the NFL, and I just need to clarify that.
Yeah, that one was an obvious one that jumped out to me. I thought that was kind of just name recognition of him sticking out there. I don't know what Kyron Williams has to do to get on this list, or even he's not even an honorable mention. So I don't see how he's not, because there's 7 other honorable mentions. So how is he at least not a top 17 back in the league?
Well, that's a really good question. So I don't know. Sometimes these rankings from executives, they surprise you and they get things right. Like Breece Hall being high up on the list. I mean, you could debate whether or not he should be in the top 2, but him being high on the list is a good thing. That feels like somebody that, because he's on the Jets and the the Jets weren't good last year. He could have been a forgotten player, kind of like Kyron Williams, like you said. So I'm glad that they got him right, but they always get like something right. And it's like, great job. Happy to see that. And then they get something totally wrong. So that's usually how these lists go for me.
Yeah, I agree. Pacheco probably should be moved up too, in my opinion. I think he deserves to be closer to the top 10. But for Breece, I don't think by the end of the year, I don't think this surprises anyone. To me, I looked at it as a little bit of a surprise right now because he hasn't really had the stats to back it up because of the injury in year one and coming back from the injury in his second year. But from a talent perspective, like, I don't know. It really wouldn't surprise me if he's between 1,800 and 2,000 all-purpose yards this year if he's healthy and the Jets' offense is even semi-functional with Aaron Rodgers.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think he's got a chance to put up some ridiculous numbers this year, both as a rusher and as a receiver. And he'll definitely establish himself as being one of those top 5 guys. He just has to, stay healthy. That's going to be the main thing for any and all running backs. Running back is the most injury-prone position. So for Breece Hall, if he can continue to stay healthy and produce the way that he has and elevate that production with Rodgers in the backfield alongside him, then yeah, I think he's going to establish himself as one of the best offensive talents in the NFL. I think he kind of already has, and he is getting some recognition, obviously, with this list, but there's definitely going to be room for his kind of holding power over the fan bases across the NFL to grow this season.
And he's still young. I mean, this is going to be his age 23 season in his third year in the league. He came into the league at 21. He was actually 20 when he was drafted and turns 21 in May of that year. So it was a young player coming into the league. It's not like he was a 23-year-old back when he was drafted. It is now, already 25 in his third season. Still a young guy. Doesn't have a ton of tread, or a ton of wearage on the tires because of, the injury in year one. And they kind of brought him on slowly at times last year. So again, I think he's in for a really big year this year in year 3. Would you put, I guess, put you on the spot here for a second. I'll pull the list back up, but would you have your guy, Devin Singletary, sniff anywhere close to the top 17?
Probably not. I would try and compare him to some of those honorable mentions. I don't think he really touches anybody in that top 10. On those honorable mentions, I think you could maybe make arguments, but not really. Isaiah Pacheco is a really good player. James Cook, you could argue Devin Singletary maybe he's better than James Cook. Kamara, I think, still is great. But yeah, I probably wouldn't push him onto this list, even though I would like to have a running back on this list. I don't think Devin Singletary would crack it.
No, I'm with you on that one. I don't think he cracks it. I think he's closer to probably like 20, somewhere in that range, but that's fine. Like, also running backs are, as we've discussed too on the show, like a very circumstantial. So it depends on the situation they're in with like quarterback play and an offensive line. That's a very dependent position. So I think you could have a successful offense and not necessarily have a elite level running back, but it's kind of a nice luxury to have, especially if your offense isn't very good, like the Jets last year. Having Breece Hall made it actually fun because surprisingly, watching Trevor Siemian or Tim Boyle or Zach Wilson drop back to pass and try to complete passes down the field wasn't very fun.
Yeah, not fun at all. That was pretty difficult to watch. But, hopefully this season we get everybody staying healthy for the Jets. Rodgers, Hall, hopefully these guys stay healthy and they reach the potential. A little off topic, but just to the point of the Jets, I'm really excited for this team to actually hopefully be good this year. I know obviously Jets fans feel that, but from a Giants fans perspective, New York sports are getting a little bit of a renaissance right now. The Knicks are good again. The Rangers are good again. We don't have a football team right now that's really good, but the Jets could be that, and that could be a lot of fun. So I am excited, regardless of it being a blue team or a green team. I just want to see some New York football teams win. Buffalo doesn't count; they're not New York City, so they don't count at all. But yeah, I'm excited for the Jets to be good.
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, health is a key factor in this. And on the offensive side of the ball, in particular, the injury bug has not been very kind to the Jets for a long time now. So they're due. They're due for a healthy season, and if they do stay healthy, no reason they can't put up some of the best offensive output numbers that we've seen from Jets offenses. Because I don't know how familiar you are with Jets record books, but Ryan Fitzpatrick being the leader in passing touchdowns in franchise history, like that needs to go away.
Yeah, that's insane. And I feel like it wasn't with the team all that long either. So
No,
it's
2 years.
yeah, okay. So that's actually pretty ridiculous. I did not know that. So I'm not super familiar with the Jets record books, but hey, maybe this is the year that they rewrite those record books and this offense reaches its potential. It's really going to come down to the coaching, is what we're always going to say for this offense, because the talent is there. Breece Hall, arguably top 3 running back in the NFL. We all know Aaron Rodgers is a great player. We all know Garrett Wilson and all these other receivers are great. But does the coaching staff put them in position to succeed? Does Nathaniel Hackett get the job done? That's the big question.
That is a big question. Jeffrey makes a good comment that I think we should get into. Breece is going to have a monster season, offensive player of the year incoming. Do you see that kind of a ceiling for Breece Hall, or is this a little too lofty?
I don't think it's too lofty. I do see that ceiling for Breece Hall. I wouldn't necessarily bet my money on it or bank on it, but I do think that the potential is there for Breece Hall to have a pretty explosive season, and he could absolutely make a running for offensive player of the year.
Yeah, it was McCaffrey last year who had, 1,459 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns, then another 564 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns on top of that. So 21 total touchdowns, just over 2,000 yards from scrimmage, led the way in both touchdowns and yards from scrimmage. So sign me up, please, for 20 touchdowns and 2,000 all-purpose yards from Breece Hall. That would be right up my alley.
Yeah, sign me up for that too. I'd love to watch that happen for the Jets. I think that would be a lot of fun, and I think that Breece Hall is again a really, really good player, and I think he's going to have a pretty exciting season.
All right, Anthony, any final predictions as we wrap up here for things to watch this week in Jets Giants land? Any thoughts on episode 2 of Hard Knocks tomorrow?
Yeah, I think episode 2 of Hard Knocks tomorrow is probably going to be a little bit divisive. I think that we're going to see some of the behind the scenes of the NFL draft, and we'll probably get some footage of the Giants talking to guys like JJ McCarthy and Drake May. And so we're probably going to see a lot of fighting on social media between Giants fans based on how those conversations about those quarterbacks go. So that'll be really interesting. I'm excited for that. And of course, excited for training camp being right around the corner for both the Jets and the Giants.
Inching that much closer to training camp and ramping things back up. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Before you go, please make sure to subscribe to the channel here on Big Apple Blitz. Check out Anthony's work over on Fireside Giants for his Giants coverage, as well as me over on Talking Jets and Matt O'Leary NY. Guys, that'll do it. I'm Matt. He is Anthony, and we will catch you next time.